here.
That was you.
This is all.
Give me the button on the bottom. The mute button.
No, we're getting some.
Oh, you're getting it. All right.
Hey, that's good. You can hear I could hear it when it was just you two.
Jeremy, do you want to just give me a thumbs up?
About ready, it's 3, so.
Jerry, this is my
Great, thank you. Oh, that's right.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming for braving COVID, making your way to the Live Arts Theater, which is a spot that Dad just really, really loved here in Charlottesville.
Yeah, it's impossible to describe how important my run was to my dad in the last 15 years or so. It became a third act and a real home. We're just incredibly grateful that we can have this service in a place where that he's so valued and so cared about. It just is incredibly meaningful to all of us. So we're really grateful. And to that end, we actually want to. Oh, probably. Hey. Okay, so this is going to be informal because we are, as I've been saying, it's a weird thing that we ask people to do, plan a funeral while you're grieving. So we've been working on it this week, but it's going to be a fairly informal affair. So bear with us as we go. My name is Jeff Love. My dad is Bob.
I'm Kristen Wright, the other kid, but not the other one.
But anyway, we want to thank the folks from Live Arts, specifically Jeremy Pape, who has been our primary resource on this whole process, and has been walking us through and making sure the tech runs and all the dots get crossed and the I's get T'd. Thank you. And Ann Hunter, the executive director of Live Arts, who's been so lovely and so gracious. I also want to thank my best friend from childhood, Joe Calarco, who can't be here today. He lives in LA. But he did create this entire slideshow for you, including the louder. including the last minute editing that I forced upon him in my father's.
That's tradition.
Yes, Joe was one of my dad's journalism students, so it gave me great pleasure to edit his copy in this scenario. And then I also want to thank Austin Wright, Kristen's son, who created this beautiful program for us. We're really grateful for his efforts there.
And then the rest of the family for participating, for being legal, and for participating in yours. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for being here. And with that, we'll introduce Frank, who's going to do a brief reading.
Good afternoon. Bob and Nancy Button were married on June 22nd, 1968 in Michigan. Their wedding included a reading from the Bible. And I will say, having read this passage, that Bob Button must have been truly listening that day, because he has absolutely lived these words throughout their 53-year marriage. And so in honor of their marriage, I'd like to read that passage again today. If I can get my glasses out. Reading is from 1 Corinthians 13, verses 4 through 7. Love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful. It is not arrogant or rude. Love does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrong, but rejoices in the right. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. Thank you.
So, Dad was a teacher, as you know, and he essentially taught communication with words. Boiled down, he taught writing and public speaking. I learned one of these much better than the other, so please bear with me as I read what I'm writing. Before he died, Dad left some directions as to what he wanted to happen after. He said he'd leave the decision as to whether to have this ceremony at all to him, to us. He described himself as a loner and said he couldn't imagine more than a handful of people would come to his funeral. He clearly implied that he did not expect many people to care that he was gone. He was wrong about that. So wrong. Few people leave behind so many people who care that he's gone. Dad spent the Christmas season this year in the hospital. It's the time when our family lines up on our sofa to watch the same holiday movies year after year. One of our favorites has always been It's a Wonderful Life, the 1946 classic in which the protagonist, George Bailey, ends up living a quiet family life very different from the big dreams of travel and fame he had as a young man. When he experiences a financial crisis, he wishes he'd never been born. His guardian angel arrives to show him just how much different and worse everything would have been if he never lived. My dad was like that. He would have told you seriously that he wasn't special, that in his life he'd never done anything important. He was self-deprecating and modest. He never ran away with a circus to tame the elephants he loved as a child. He never became the great architect whose soaring structures would grace magazines that he dreamed of as a teenager. But oh, what a difference he made. His life sounds fairly ordinary when described a certain way. He grew up in Marshalltown, Iowa, with his sister Judy and his brother Jim. Went to a teacher's college, became a journalism and English teacher, and taught high school students first in Waterloo, Iowa, and then in Grosse Pointe, Michigan for 3 decades. Then he moved to Virginia to work for the Virginia High School League for another decade. In retirement, he volunteered his time here at this theater, doing whatever was needed. He married my mom, Nancy. They had me and Jeff. We in turn got married to Frank and Kari, respectively, and added 3 grandchildren, Austin, Matthew, and Audrey. He loved theater and game shows and music and coffee and Christmas and the newspaper in the morning. It was a quiet life. That's the newspaper obituary version, but it's not the story. You see, he wasn't just a high school teacher. He was the kind of teacher every teenager dreams of, the kind they make Dead Poets Society movies about. We have been absolutely stunned by the number of Grosse Pointe South students, former, who have contacted us to tell us what he meant to them. You can see some of them up there. We've even had one who is the current editor of the Tower newspaper at Grosse Pointe South. You'll see down there, there's a full-page Free Press article this week that commemorated him. One of his former students wrote to him before he died, "To call you a favorite teacher would be a gross understatement. You were so much more than that. You were a mentor, you were a friend, you were a catalyst and an influence." And he changed their lives, so many of those students' lives. I calculate he taught over 3,000 kids from 1962 until he retired from teaching in '94. He also taught workshops in the summers to college students and other teachers. Dad has former students at the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Detroit Free Press, USA Today, NPR, television journalism, on the bookstore shelves, and even one with a long stretch on General Hospital. He advised the school newspaper, The Tower, and that school paper wasn't just a school paper. It came out weekly. It was 8 pages. It was professional class, and it won awards. So many awards. You see some of them around the stage. Our house was full of all of those awards. He's been inducted into the Michigan Journalism Hall of Fame, the first teacher ever. He was named the National Journalism Teacher of the Year. He was so famous as a teacher that I went into law just to avoid trying to fill those shoes, even though I secretly wanted to be just like him. And I still do. Jeff and I went to South when he taught there. People asked whether it was awful having your father go to high school with you. But it wasn't awful at all. Quite the opposite. Dad was so beloved that his popularity made us popular too. When I was in school, he drove a 1987 red Pontiac Firebird and wore his loud green plaid pants to school as often as possible, I think just to embarrass me. He rode tricycles at student assemblies, and once or twice a donkey in a fundraiser basketball game. Students hung out in his classroom, and he allowed them to decorate it. My high school was like a second home to me because he was there too. At the VHSL, he was in charge of academic, non-sports high school activities statewide, including high school newspapers, theater, yearbook, forensics, and debate. During his long hospital stay last month, I took breaks to dash home to the Lynchburg area to watch my boys compete in Scholastic Bowl meets. Only afterwards did we find out that without Dad, none of us would have been there. Neither would any of the coaches, judges, or other children from the other high schools. Dad was the one who made Scholastic Bowl a VHSL event in 1998. He didn't just change our lives, he made them. He moved to a new state twice, and each time he changed history. He moved from Iowa to Michigan and met my mom. Jeff and I exist because of that choice. He moved from Michigan to Virginia, and I met Frank. Austin and Matthew exist because of that one. Without Jeff, of course, there'd be no Audrey. He lived a big hole in our lives. As a grandfather, he made long trips in pre-dawn darkness to babysit. He tossed toddlers in the air way past the age when most of us start feeling it in the lumbar area. We posted a photo on Facebook of him with Audrey asleep on his lap. Kari and Jeff will tell you that it's not just anyone who can do that. He listened and got indignant on Matthew's behalf when he had an AP teacher who was too demanding. Not because she was demanding, but because she was taking up Matthew's time with busy work. As recently as last April, he delightedly trekked 5 miles around UVA's grounds to watch the boys' reactions as they toured the school they both wanted to attend. Austin got the news he'd been admitted to UVA's class of 2026 just 3 weeks ago in the hallway outside the hospital room. He rushed in to tell Papa, who was by then on the ventilator, and he got a hand squeeze in return. We know he heard, and he was proud. As a father, Dad was very nearly perfect. Yes, he insisted on watching the evening news every night, back at a time when that meant that our one-color television couldn't stay on the radio. Yes, he got really mad when I skipped school for senior skip day and when another teacher personally dragged a misbehaving Jeff to his classroom during a school day. But he taught us how to care about people's stories, how to love the English language and to use it to express ourselves, how to listen, not to assume things, to be interested in everything, and to be informed before tossing out half-baked opinions. He taught us to love theater, music, to appreciate education. He taught Jeff what fatherhood should look like. We learned how to serve others, how to put them before ourselves, how to think about family first, always, every single day, from him. As a husband, he was truly amazing, especially recently. Mom has almost as many bionic joints as Steve Austin. And Dad was her only caretaker right up until the day he went to the hospital for the last time. He loaded her walker in the back of his Nissan, pushed her wheelchair, shopped for groceries, refilled her meds, all while cleaning, cooking, doing laundry, and taking care of the yard. He only stopped cutting his grass with his push mower in July. They were married for 53 and a half years after dating only 5 months. Truly a match made in heaven. At the end, we all knew, Dad included, that he might not beat the pneumonia that was making it hard to breathe. We had the time and the knowledge before he was intubated to tell him everything I've just told you. He knew he was loved beyond measure, and we knew we were loved in return. And isn't that what life is all about? There are empty chairs in this theater he loved so much, and that's okay. This service is being streamed, and I think there are a fair number of people watching. It's still the holiday season, and there's COVID, and many of the people who owe him so much are exactly where he would be if he could, with their families. But if every single person whose life he changed were here, we'd need the UVA basketball arena, and we'd be hot and sweating in that crowd. We'd be crammed in with all those thousands of journalism students he taught, the subject of all of the stories they went on to break, the teachers he mentored and all of their students, the administrators across Virginia he worked with, the current Virginia high school students who participated in the extracurricular activities that he oversaw, like my sons, the theater folks he volunteered with, and the friends and family he loved galore. Dad had a wonderful life. Ours, because he was here, are wonderful now too.
In honor of Papa, I figured I would play for him one more time, Dear My God.
wanted to make space for people to have a moment of silence and pray if that's what you do. If not, just meditate and think on Dad for a second. So we'll just be giving you 1 second before Matthew is going. My dad's nephew, Matthew. My sister's son, Matthew, is going to come up and read a poem by Maya Angelou that was actually passed on to us by one of his former students as inspired. A poem that was, this student felt was connected to my father and was in Greenwell. So we'll take a brief moment of silence, and then in a little bit, Matthew will step up. Thank you.
Again, this is by Maya Angelou. It's called When Great Souls Die. When great trees fall, rocks on distant hills shudder. Lions hunker down in tall grasses, and even elephants lumber after safety. When great trees fall in forests, small things recoil into silence, their senses eroded beyond fear. When great souls die, the air around us becomes light, rare, sterile. We breathe briefly, our eyes briefly see with hurtful clarity. Our memory suddenly sharpened, examines, gnaws on unkind words unsaid, promised walks never taken. Great souls die, and our reality, bound to them, takes leave of us. Our souls, dependent on their nurture, now shrink, wizened. Our minds, formed and informed by the radiance, fall away. We are not so much maddened as reduced to the unutterable ignorance of dark, cold caves. And when great souls die, after a period, peace blooms. Slowly and always, irregularly, space fills with a kind of soothing electric vibration. Our senses restored, never to be the same, whisper to us, they existed. We can be and be better, for they existed.
My dad, Bob Bunny, was a supportive man, he was a curious man, he was a generous man. Believe it or not, that was a joke. But there are only a handful of people on earth who would get it. Lucky for me, then, that one of them is here today. You see, when I was in high school, I had the unenviable burden of having many of my best friends take my dad's journalism class. By then, I had known enough of my dad's students to know he probably wouldn't say anything too mortifying about me in class. In general, as you've seen, my dad's students seem to think quite a lot. But my friends did eventually admit to me that they had developed an imitation of him, which was grounded in a recurrent rhetorical device he often employed. When my dad gave a compliment, they pointed out, he never gave just one. The lead to your story was never just strong. It was a strong lead, a surprising lead, an incisive lead. When they told me about this, I realized that though I hadn't ever noticed it before, it was absolutely consistent through every corner of his life, that effusive use of speech. They were bringing to me a new perspective on my dad that I'd never been privileged enough to see before. My dad had passed his love for the complexity of communication onto me, so I spent a lot of time thinking about this pattern of speech, because it seemed to me that there had to be a logic behind that linguistic tick. Maybe there was a key in there somewhere that could tell me something, if not about language, then at least about my dad. So all these years later, I'm here to tell you that my dad was a supportive man, a curious man, a generous man. When I went away to college, I decided to study theater. I think, like most parents, mine had some unspoken but entirely reasonable misgivings about that decision, especially since at that point I had only ever shown a modicum of talent. They did their best to hide it behind vocal support and enthusiasm, but it later came back to me through a lecture by my childhood barber, of all people, that my dad was worried that I should be studying something more practical. I was never entirely sure if the barber was a reliable narrator of that information, but it stung me all the same. I asked my dad about it the next time I saw him, and he admitted that he had pragmatic concerns about me finding a career, and we kind of left it at that. But then the next time I came home from school, I learned my father had bought subscriptions to the Signature Theater in Washington, which he had to drive 2 hours to attend, to the University of Charlottesville's theater department, and to a smaller, edgier little theater company in Charlottesville called Live Arts. When I asked him what spurred this sudden reinvestment in an art that had been an early passion, he told me outright that he had thought about it, and he wanted to be able to talk to me about what he was seeing, what I was working on, and what I did. He wanted to support me. Bob Button was a supportive man. Bob Button, however, did not drink bourbon. This fact is important because in recent years I've become an insufferably pretentious connoisseur of whiskeys. I collect different whiskeys and I fetishize all the subtle tonal differences from bottle to bottle, rambling about the balance of rye versus corn. You get the idea. I'm that guy. My dad, on the other hand, just loved a good gin and tonic. He had a favorite brand that was much easier to find in Chicago than Charlottesville, so for the last few years, I've been bringing him a bottle whenever I came home for Christmas. But last year, I brought him a different bottle instead. I brought him a really nice bourbon rye out of California, very affordably priced. I'm happy to talk to you about it later. Anyway, that night, my dad enthusiastically encouraged me to put on some Miles Davis Borrasita whiskey and tell him all about what we were drinking. I went on, encouraging him to tease out the differentiations in the nose, the palate, the finish, all the details I picked up that I was so eager to share. My dad soaked up every bit of knowledge, and we had a lovely, lively conversation about something I really loved, and that he just didn't. He didn't like bourbon. It was abundantly clear, but he loved me. He loved that I liked it, and he wanted to talk to me about it. My dad loved learning. He loved talking. He loved me. And he was more than happy to suck down some brown liquor if it meant an opportunity to get to know me better. These past few years, that's been the thing I keep coming back to when I think about my dad. He wanted me to talk about my passions. He wanted to learn about them, and he wanted me to know he was interested in what I found interesting. My dad was a gifted teacher, but he also loved to learn, because Bob Button was a curious man. These last few weeks, I've become well acquainted with a document explaining my dad's end-of-life wishes. My sister referenced it earlier. It lays out with journalistic clarity and brevity what he wished to have happen in the event he was hospitalized or died. He even went to the trouble to write his own stunningly matter-of-fact obituary, not the one in the Detroit Free Press, which was written by one of his former students and pays proper tribute to the legacy he left, but the one published in the Daily Progress and the Grosse Pointe News. Yeah, that was him. Anyway, in his end-of-life document, my dad refers to himself as a bit of a loner. Self-description, I think, might come as a surprise to the next-door neighbor who told me that the main thing missing from his obituary was the simple fact that every time you spoke to Bob, you felt a little bit better. My dad's investment in the people he spoke to, his passionate interest in what they had to say, his palpable love for the very act of conversation could be like a cleave light shining in your face. When you talked to him, you felt important, you felt scintillating, and you felt valued. But apparently, if you ask my dad, he'd say he was a bit of a loner, which I'm guessing is not how the many of you who have been on the receiving end of that light would describe him. But my dad loved people, loved them so much that he felt that every single person he spoke to deserved his full and undivided attention, and he labored to make sure they got it. He labored to make sure every student felt heard. He labored to make sure that his neighbors felt a sense of community. He labored to make sure that the local pharmacist, whose name he most assuredly knew, felt appreciated. There's this moment which is indelible in my mind. My dad had invited a family friend over to the house, and we were standing in a circle, making small talk, as one does. I was in acting school at the time, and a core idea in acting is that every action can be broken down into its component parts, which are called beats. Anyway, my dad was looking avidly up at his friend and then jumped in with his own thought. And suddenly I saw each and every beat that had gone into that action. He was communicating interest through being attentive. Then he realized he had a thought that referred to the conversation. He had a moment of doubt that it wouldn't meaningfully contribute. Then he overcame that doubt, steeled himself, and offered up his thought in the hope that we might all feel a little bit closer to each other. It was a tiny moment in the enormous life of my father, but I think it gets to the core of who he was. My dad gave you the gift of his attention, the gift of understanding, the gift of conversation. And like any gift, they cost him something, but he paid that price joyfully. He spent 81 years of his life giving that gift freely and enthusiastically every single day to every person he met, because Bob Button was a generous man. Which brings me back to that rhetorical trick of his. My dad was a supportive man, he was a curious man, he was a generous man. He was each of those things, and he was all of those things. As I spent all that time puzzling over my friend's loving impersonation of him, I learned what I think it was his most important lesson. Nothing is only one thing. Everything is an intersection of 1,000 descriptors and perspectives, and no three people look at any object and see the same one. The lead to your story is not only strong, but it is also surprising, and it is also incisive. To use one word to describe it is to do a disservice to the complexity of your need, of your love, of your life, of your dad. No person is only one thing. They are an intersection of the million faces they put on throughout the course of the day and the million perspectives of the people they meet. My friends saw one version of my dad as he taught his class. The people at Live Arts got to know another as a stage manager, friend, and booster. My sister and I loved a different guy who was our father. My mom knew a whole other man who was her best friend and her love and her partner. And that is the most important lesson my dad can teach any of us. The world is wide, and it is nuanced, and it is complex, and each of us contains multitudes. There is virtue in saying something simply. My dad taught that in class. But there is even greater virtue in saying something completely. He taught that through his life. I knew my dad as my dad. Each and every one of you knew him as something else. He was a father and a husband and a mentor and a colleague and a friend. And if you trace each of those roles back to the point where they intersect, you'll find the supportive, curious, generous, loving man that I got to call my dad. Thank you. And with that in mind, my sister and I would like to welcome to the stage anyone who might have any remembrance of my father, be it small or large, be it whatever you have to share. We'd love to encourage you to come up and speak. So, and it looks like Matthew, are you good to go? Our nephew has some Matthew.
I wanted to start with my sort of thing by saying I would ask all of y'all to not just cry today. And I'm glad that didn't happen. Obviously, we're at a memorial service, and the fact is, no matter what happens, it's going to be at least a little bit sad. But I would hope, and I'm sure that my grandpa would hope, that we don't just take today to be miserable, but instead to look back at his life and be happy and celebrate and reminisce, and most importantly, to laugh. I'm sure that anyone that's spoken before me, anyone that speaks after me, can easily attest to my grandpa's incredible teaching ability and the countless lives he influenced. The fact is, they could do a lot better than I could, just because all that happened before I was born. So I wanted to tell y'all what my grandpa was to me. So first, he was a genius. I mean, from as early as I can remember, I always thought he was just super smart. I mean, you could just tell by the things he said and did. He was one of the few people in my life that made me feel like I learned things from having a conversation with him. You know, I always thought if only he chose the career that could have, he could have said done that to a lot of people, you know. I don't know. He had a great sense of humor. I loved making him laugh, and his laugh was one to be remembered. It was just so full and so contagious. He was the only one of my grandparents I've ever played Cards Against Humanity with, and my lord, that was the best round of that game I ever played with anyone. And for those of you who don't know that, that's a good thing. Good, let's just keep it that way. Let me just say, when it comes to cooking, he made some amazing chili burgers, and that's about all I can say about his cooking talents. He was incredibly good at the two things he did, and that's about it. I can also safely say I've forgiven him for being the one that accidentally told me Santa wasn't real. That happened 2 years ago, and I don't know. I realize now it had to happen at some point. He was the biggest enabler of my addiction to Vineyard Vines clothing. Anyone that goes to school with me can tell you that 95% of my wardrobe is Vineyard Vines, and almost all the clothes I've gotten from them are gifts from him. And my mom always said that he loved picking them up for me at Christmas time and birthdays. And I now have no clue what to do now that none of my suppliers gone. Most importantly, though, he always put others above himself. It's hard to describe his quality of person, but he just exemplified it every day of his life. He supported my mom throughout her many struggles with writing. He attended Grand's every need once her health declined a little bit. And more recently, he did his best not to be a burden on any of us during the past few months, and he most certainly never was. He meant a heck of a lot to me, and I'm sure all of you. So I'd like to ask anyone that has a story, please share it. I'm sure it would mean a lot to him. I'm sure he's looking down right now watching this. So, thank you.
Anybody else like to come up? Sure. You stand up.
My name is Fran Smith. I'm one of the founders of Live Arts. And I've known Bob for many years. I was a judge for many of the theater competitions for the Virginia High School League. And the last project that Bob and I worked on was Edward Albie's A Delicate Balance. And he was my producer. And the producer doesn't need to come to every rehearsal, you know. He has to just, make sure everything's happening. Bob would love to come 2 or 3 nights a week and just sit and watch it happen. And I said, Bob, how come coming every night? He said, I just really am enthralled watching this process happen. And then we shared also our love for Albie. But he was a theater friend, someone I've known for many years, and someone who I cherish so much. And I know there are many other Live Arts people out there that are watching this today. And I know they all have something great to say. But he was a great man. Thank you.
So I'm not going to be as eloquent as Matthew was. I didn't have a speech prepared or anything, but I did. But listening to everyone else who said it very, very eloquently and very, very well, I just wanted to give my take. And I think the thing that this wasn't really what I thought of at first when I knew Papa. He was always, for the first few years of my life, he was, the guy who would play, always play with me, always entertain me when we came over there. Oh yeah, sorry, that's probably that. He would always entertain us. He would always be paying attention and always ready whenever we wanted to show up a toy or anything like that. But I think as I got older, though, and my my thought processes became a bit more interesting, for lack of a better word. I think the thing that I noticed the most about Papa was the fact that he was always willing to listen. It didn't have to be about anything interesting. I talked to him about things that were happening at school, drama among my friend group, that sort of thing. Anything I could think of, and he would, no matter what it is, no matter how inane or ridiculous, he was always willing to listen. He would always take you seriously. He'd never laugh at you, do anything like that. He would pay attention. He would think about it. He would give you his thoughts, and if you needed to talk, he would listen. That became, as I grew and got older, that became more and more important me. Whenever I came up here, I would always look forward to sitting down and talking to him. I remember this spring they had a issue with their water, and they came to live with us for about a week actually, because it was pretty bad. And I remember sitting down with him on the porch one day and talking for probably an hour and a half or so about, I can't remember exactly, but it was really, really interesting, and it was good to talk to him about. And, as I was able to drive myself up here, and would come up here for the occasional UVA tour and that sort of thing, and stop by there afterward, and he would always be willing to sit down and talk to me and listen to me and give me his thoughts on whatever was going on in my life. And I think from the obviously there's a large portion of his life that I wasn't there for, but I think from what I've heard, from what Mom and Uncle Jeff and Matthew said, I think that's an experience that a lot of us share. He was always, no matter who we are, no matter what we were doing, he was always interested in us. He was always willing to listen and sit down and talk to you seriously and honestly about what he thought. And I think, and you know what, that is what really meant the most to me. That kindness, that understanding, the willingness and the interest, and truly genuine, I think, for him to sit down and listen and take an interest in your lives. Overall, I think he was one of the most selfless people I've ever known in that respect. And I hope that as I get older and as I grow, I hope to embody those aspects myself. Thank you all.
Anyone else like to speak?
It doesn't surprise me to hear these other aspects of Bob Button. He's a man full of consistency and integrity. And Matthew, right? You're right. He's a genius. I worked with Bob on many shows at Live Arts. None of the shows that are up here, but many of them. And doing a show at Live Arts, often there's a person behind the show that the show couldn't happen without. And that was often, on these shows and many others, that was Bob Button. And he would be quiet and humble, and he would make sure the show happened. And he would do it. Matthew, what's your brother's name? He would do it as you said. He would listen. He would listen without judgment. And he would do what was ever asked of him. It's interesting when someone comes and we work in the theater and like with other friends who are here, and they start off as just people we're doing volunteer work with, and they become friends. So Bob Button was my friend, and I love him. Thank you. Please,
Hi, everyone. As Ray was saying, when you work in a theater like Live Arts, the people you work with become more than other people you're in a room with. They become your friends, they become collaborators, they become this other version of the family. So for the Buttons, we all actually know you all really well. So you know, we shared excitement when your child was born. We shared those kind of moments together because that's what you do when you're in this space. I grew up here. I grew up in this town. I grew up in this theater. There are still people here 30 years on that I have known for that entire time. However many years you want to be a friend. I was gone for a really long time, and a few years back when I moved back, those returns are always really challenging. You don't know what you're coming back to. You are different, the space is different, everything is different. Bob was one of the people that made me feel at home when I came home. He made this space feel welcoming in a way that I was not expecting. His smile and his lack of expectation, his surprise, his genuine joy every time he got a hug, every time he walked in the room, every time we asked a question, every time. And that's all. That's sort of the extent of my reflection. Just the surprise that I think he carried with him surprised me. I love that man too.
You all have been reminding me of different things. So I was going to tell some of you later, but I thought I'll just go ahead and share with everybody. I'm Hannah Catherine, and I had the honor of working with Bob at Virginia High School. So I'm not a public speaker, and I'm not used to being on stage, but I do have lots of things that I remember him telling me about you all. And Jeff, one of those is that, and you kind of brought this up as you were talking, he came into work one day and said, well, Jeff is going to be an actor. And someone told him that if he can't imagine doing anything else, he should just do it. And I'm fine with that. And so he just really, for each of you, I had lunch with your grandfather in, I think, October. And he said, those boys can go anywhere they want to. They're at the top of their class, and he did say 3 things, and I've been sitting here trying to remember what those 3 things were. They've got these scores and this and that, so I know he knows that you guys have the world in front of you, and you can do whatever you want to. And Frank, I know he really appreciates you because you got Kristen into Virginia and kept her here. So I know that was a huge part for him to be able to see you guys so often and to make that a part of his regular everyday life. So, and Sharon's read your books, and I have them on my list to read. So I'm reminded today that I really want to get to read what you've written because I know that he really enjoyed it. So thank you all, and Nancy, just so much fun to spend time with you all and see you all interact and all that kind of stuff. My heart goes out to you because I know this is going to be tough, but we're all here for you.
That just reminded me of one thing. My first novel was romance, and it had a sex scene in it. And Dad read it and edited it with a red pen, all of it, including that scene. Didn't turn it there. Thank you.
On that strange note to end.
Unless anyone else has anything else that you want to say.
And on that note, I think we're actually about to adjourn to the 4th floor, yes, where there's a reception with wine and beer and crudité type stuff, and we would love to see you there and share remembrances with you there too. And if you don't come up, or even if you do, we just want you to know that we couldn't be more grateful to have you here and to have the folks who are following along at home there. It was a big life, and we want to celebrate it. Including this little girl. Just me. Well, okay, that's actually a good place. So thank you all.